These types of videos that are basically like, watch this video to learn the super secret to not failing at stuff, are really popular, and I think some of these videos are more useful than others. I never really wanted to do this kind of commentary on my channel where it's me just looking at other YouTube content and commenting on it. I'm old enough to still find streaming weird and watching other people playing games, so the idea of people wanting to watch a commentator comment on other people commentating is like mind-blowing to me, but it seems to be a popular genre. So what I want to do here is just look at these videos one after the other and see what the takeaway is and see what we can learn from it. First off, I'm just going to pick one of these at random. Let's look at Aligned Games and what they have to say about the failure of their game Hell Unleashed.
Have you ever had an idea for a game so good that it was just destined for the top?
I have never felt that way about any game I made. Some initial things that are already hitting me about this video, before we've even got into the meat of it, is that it is leading with the business element. It's leading with, I projected this much income and I didn't get it. And the problem with that is that before you start to think of your game as a product, it needs to be up to scratch. There are some issues that I can already see here just from the game footage. Like down there, there's a spelling error on this piece of footage that he's used as the first thing. Also, all of the in-game text is in all capitals, which is really bad user experience design. This is the kind of thing where the developer is going to pour their heart out and tell you what they did wrong and what they learned from it. But some of the stuff I can already see on the page is just like bad practice in the first place.
Experience had and skills learned are valuable, but they don't put food on the table at the end of the day. Death Rattle Hell Unleashed was a very ambitious project for me. I started developing it in 2019 and finally released it 2 years later into early access. 2 years is a long time for one person to work on one project, but
yes, don't make long games. Good advice.
There were many reasons for its untimely release, but by far the biggest reason was scope creep.
Now, if you are on game development forums and you talk to other game developers, you will hear people talk about scope creep, and if you're totally new to game dev, you might not have heard this term before. It just means the scope of the game getting bigger and bigger because you want to put more stuff in. If you're making games, I would advise you to try and reframe this problem, because the idea of scope creep makes it sound like the problem exists within the game, right? The scope of the game is coming from you. You tried to make a bigger game because you wanted to make a bigger game, so own that. Don't say, oh, the scope of the game kept getting bigger. That's using the passive voice and talking about the game as if it's its own thing. And to some degree that can happen with creative projects. We look at them and it's like looking at a block of marble and seeing the sculpture inside. This impacts any creative discipline. So like if you're a recording artist and you're making music, you're going to be tempted to make a 12-track album because you grew up listening to 12-track albums, but that is going to cost you loads of time, loads of money, and each individual part of that, each song on your 12-track album is going to be of a lower quality than it would have been if you spent the same amount of time working on less things. And that's what happens with projects like this. The more features and the more content that are in a game, your effort, your polish gets spread out among all those things, and we end up with a bad overall experience. Don't pretend that the scope creep is just a thing that happens. It is a result of a lack of discipline.
In the case of Death Rattle Hell Unleashed, I didn't have a real plan. You see, I like to develop games, but I don't like talking about those games I made, and I don't like marketing them. I know enough to be honest with myself and admit that these are my weaknesses. And I think many of you are like me.
These are really good reflections. And what he's talking about here is a really common issue. I think many of us who like playing games maybe consider ourselves to be introverts. The whole activity necessitates a lot of time sitting alone and just doing something focused heavily on that thing and not thinking about other things and people in the world. So it naturally follows that that type of activity is going to attract introverts, but you have to look at that quality in yourself as something that is malleable and something that you can change and something that you can improve upon by testing yourself, by pushing yourself to do these things. And he's talking about marketing here, and what we've seen from a lot of successful indie games isn't just about the marketing that happens after you finish the game. It's about the communication with your player base that happens way, 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 way before that. I've reviewed enough games so far on this channel where a lot of the issues in the game would have been caught earlier if they were playtesting earlier in the process.
It's good and a necessity to be honest with yourself. What are your best skills? Is it art, coding, music, marketing? You will need to at some point decide which skills you are best at and stick to those. It's better to do one thing right rather than two things wrong. People will often say you can do it all, but to some extent I don't think that's true. I did it all with Death Rattle Hell Unleashed, and that's why I failed.
There are some really good reflections here, and I think he hit upon something really strong there. Actually, you can do it all, but you can't do it all and end up with something good. Chances are that you don't have all those skills. And one of the things is, if you've heard of anyone talk about the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is the kind of psychological bias people have when they are so bad at something they don't know they're bad. This happens all the time in these kind of one-person projects. There are elements of a game that the developer thinks, oh, that's good enough, and the reality is it's not good enough. I can see examples on this screen, and again, I'm not trying to rag on this guy because he's put a lot of work into this game and then he's provided us with some really helpful reflections. But take a look, for example, at what happens when you fireball these spiders.
Titles.
They don't flinch. There's nothing there to show the impact. And that's an example of the sort of attention to detail in game feel that I would expect someone making an action game like this to have, and it's just not there. And that sort of exemplifies the sort of thing he's talking about. And before we get to any of this talk about marketing, there are fundamental things that are issues with this game that he is just not caught up on, and some of that will be because he doesn't have skills in particular areas, and some of it will be because of that not showing the game to people early on enough. Let's jump ahead to the reasons.
Reason number 1. Scope creep. Ideas are sometimes better in your head than they are in real life. Sometimes it takes weeks to add a simple thing to your game that you decided to add by happenstance, because it seemed like it would be cool in your game. These can be new areas for your player to explore, new weapons or tools for the player to use, new systems to make the game more complex, or even new features to improve the game overall. These things I mentioned can be the death of your game.
Yeah, he's not wrong, but I think there's a problem over and above this, which is working on the assumption that the game is like this finished product off in the distance. That's the thing you release on Steam and ask people to buy. In the early stages of a project, your target should be a vertical slice that lots of other people are going to play and give you feedback on. And when you're trying to build that, you should be focused on what's called the minimum viable product. So one really polished level of a game that doesn't have extra places to explore or extra weapons or any of these other things. So although I agree with the lesson that he's learnt here, there's another lesson above this, which is the game development isn't start making a game, make a game, make a game, make a game, make a game, finish making a game, release it, right? One of the things about game design is that in order to be actually designing something, you kind of need to work with the person it's for. And that applies to games, it applies to furniture, it applies to kitchen appliances. The fact that you are making it for someone and you are testing it with them is what makes the activity you're doing actually design. If you're making something in isolation and you're never testing it, you're not actually designing, you're just kind of messing around in software. Fundamentally, that's the difference between something being design and something being a sort of art or craft. When you're doing an art or craft, you're just making what you want to make and expressing your own taste and stuff. And sure, indie games has space for that kind of thing. But if you want your thing to do well financially, then you need to design it. And designing isn't just having a brilliant idea in your head and executing it. It's a methodical process of making testing, making testing, making testing, making testing, and doing different types of testing. You know, testing it with some people who are the core audience to see how much it fits what they want, right? So if I was making this game that I see in front of me, I would go over to the Youngbloods Discord, the people that make all of the new retro shooters, and I would I would use them to try and build a Discord of testers for myself, because those people would be the closest to the people who are going to be fans of this game, because this game has got like Hexen and Heretic type vibes. And I would be sending them stuff every month. And then the other type of testing you do is with people that don't know anything about this genre, a more general audience, because that's ultimately who your audience is going to be made up of. It will be like a pyramid with a core audience of people who are super die-hard fans of your genre, and then a bigger potential audience of, you know, maybe people that don't play this type of game but just really like the art style or the theme of it. I just want to highlight the way that spider explodes is really satisfying.
It's in the world to help you, around 10 types of enemies.
That's great. I like that. I'm not a big fan of spiders. I'm not a big fan of animal cruelty, but when they are giant spiders, blowing them apart with green fireballs, excellent.
And I added levels that were never seen or never meant to be there, just because they sounded cool in my head. You know how many extra sales that made me? Zero sales.
Okay, that's correct, but I want to challenge this assumption. Good ideas don't always make money. They were attractive ideas to you as a developer, right? That doesn't mean they were good ideas. Good ideas, you can only really know if an idea is good by testing it on people that aren't you. This is kind of a curse of being a reclusive game developer who doesn't test things with people early enough or frequently enough, is that you think your ideas are good, but you haven't proven that in any way. So this isn't necessarily a case of the ideas were good and the market just doesn't want them. If that testing had been happening early enough and frequently enough, then some of that audience that should have been there at launch would have been built up through that community of testers. People love being part of something. It's one of the things that's at the emotional core of why things like Kickstarter work and why things like Patreon work is people see something, they see it sort of in an early stage and they want to be part of making that thing better. And that means that those people, if you can get them on board and build a community early on, they are going to sing your game's praises later on. And you never know, if you build up that community, you might start with 10 testers, it might grow to 50 or 100 testers for your game. There might be one person in that group who is a games journalist. There might be one person in that group who is a YouTuber who is going to do a feature on that thing. The benefits of testing early and frequently are cumulative. They're not just about making the game better. It's also about building up an audience before launch and kind of pre-marketing that thing.
Reason number 3, terrible marketing practices. If you know me, you know that I hate marketing. Sitting at my desk and promoting my game to random people that I'll never meet or have a connection with just isn't my idea of a fun time. The truth is that there are many developers out there that want your game to fail. This isn't out of malice or spite, but rather necessity. You see, there's only so much real estate on the new releases page.
What do other developers have to do with any of this? I've seen this a few times, and it happens quite a lot in game dev YouTube, where people have devlogs and so many people are watching the devlogs and then they don't make any sales. Just an educated guess, I would think that that's because you've made your audience game developers and they're there to watch you develop a game because they're interested in game development. That doesn't necessarily mean they're interested in playing your game. Be conscious of who your audience is for that, because they might not be players, they might be developers and they're there to learn from you. And they have turned themselves into an educational channel about how to make things and not an entertainment channel about their games. So now I can't speak from a position of massive authority on this, because when I've made my own games on my own, they've been tiny little things on itch. But if I was creating a game now and I wanted people to be invested in actually playing the game, then the YouTube channel I set up for that game wouldn't be a technical vlog where I talk about what I've been making and the engine I've been using and how I build things and all of that. It would purely be about gameplay features and stuff about the world building and basically just stuff aimed at gamers, not at game developers.
The problem is, for some reason, I only want to use my own art in my game, and this has been a major setback in my development career. I'm trying to teach myself that it is okay to use someone else's assets in my games.
I actually kind of like the art in this game, but when I look at this, I actually see individual art assets I like. What I don't like is that the entire screen is grey, and there's not much use of point lighting to guide the player around. There's not much differentiation between the enemies and the backgrounds, so I don't think the issue here is to do with assets. I know he's talking about how the development will be quicker if he bought assets, but I actually think that by doing it all himself, he has created a game that looks very creatively consistent, and the issues I see with this are more to do with everything being monotone and very bleak. And the gameplay isn't bleak. The gameplay is meant to be frenetic and exciting. So I would expect this to have a colour palette more similar to Doom or Diablo and to be a bit more acidic and vibrant. And it's just not there. And this is all stuff that I could have helped with if he'd have shown me the game a long time ago. Overall though, Mr. Aligned Games, I think this game looks cool. I would have done some things differently. I would have given you some different advice on what about this game needs improving. And the thing that I find a bit depressing is that the things that I think need improving in this game aren't actually called out in this video. And that's just classic. You know, if you make something on your own and then you reflect on it at the end and you don't have anyone else to tell you what you could have done better, then you might not learn all the things you needed to learn. And for me, this just doesn't look as exciting as it could be. It's great. It's a grey game, and you throw stuff at things and they don't really react as well. I mean, when they die, they explode. That's really satisfying. But I wanna see flinches and a bit more juice to do with hitting targets. So I just feel like this video misses some of the key learnings that could have been garnered from that project. Let's see what Dul Thomas has to say about why his game never launched.
I've been developing games for about 5 years as a hobby, and I, maybe like you, dream of escaping my day job. So naturally, the answer is to become a famous indie game developer. This is how I fucked it up. So before we go any further here, this is not a story where I go out in a fiery glory. This isn't about low sales or poor marketing. I didn't even get that far.
I'm already excited about this one because I think he's going to actually focus on the good things for once, because this focus on marketing that we see in a lot of the other videos is, I think it's often people who don't realise their game is not very good trying to create some other reason why it didn't go well. Oh, it's the market. Oh, it's my marketing. And then you look at the game and it's just like, well, the game is not as good as it could be. So the issue might be the marketing, but it might also be that no one was excited enough to wishlist the game in the first place because you had just made what you wanted instead of making what they wanted.
In the previous 5 years, I had already started and killed many projects because they were far too complex for my simple indie dev mind. At the start, I knew I had to keep my scope realistic, which, now that I say it, makes the mistakes in the rest of this video even more ridiculous. I was inspired by The Lords of Midnight, an old ZX Spectrum game. I thought, if Mike Singleton could make it back in 1984, then surely I can make it in 2019 with all the modern game dev tools available. No disrespect there, Mike. I had some shapes, a map, and basic math for calculating battle results, but it was kinda like playing with Lego and a calculator, but just a lot less fun. Realising that I was bored of my own game was the first red flag. I didn't prototype.
Right, exactly. Often people just start making what they want to make, and then because it's early they say, oh, that's a prototype. And it's like, no, a prototype has an end goal, right? A prototype is basically where you say, this build of the game will have this list of features for us to test. And that's the important part, is that a prototype is for the purpose of testing. It's not just a name you give to an early demo of your game that you haven't added all the stuff to yet. A prototype is a object that you use for a test. That's it.
With no idea if my game was actually going to be fun, I cracked on. I was having the time of my life, creating a world where maybe one day a game would exist. I didn't set up a Steam page, I didn't set deadlines, I didn't know my core game loop, and did I even say that I didn't make a game design document?
The game design document would have helped with all of the other stuff, Because in your game design document, when you write your top level description of the game and what's supposed to be cool about it, you've basically written a chunk of the content for the Steam page. Long-time followers of the channel will know that I'm obsessed with Ape Out. Have a look at the description of Ape Out on the Devolver website. Embrace bold colours and a dazzling perspective as you rush through tight corridors, open areas, and twisting labyrinths on a mad dash for freedom. Just this paragraph, without even looking at the rest of the page, tells us about every element of the game and what it's trying to achieve. It tells us about the aesthetics of the game, right? The visual style. It tells us about the overall goal of the player and the player character, to find the exit and escape captivity. And then within those 2 points, it tells us all of the little actions and activities we're going to do to try and achieve that goal. And the point I want to make in relation to the video that we're looking at now is that the design document would have had that in, and that would have made the Steam page easier. And it might have helped with the deadlines, because once you've enumerated that thing and you've said, oh, there's going to be enemies and traps, okay, how many of each thing do we need? Part of a game design document is something I would call a content plan, which is where you just enumerate things like how many levels are there, how many enemies are there, how many different abilities are there, all of that kind of stuff. So although I don't think every game does need a design document, especially really small games, the points 1 to 3 on this list would have been solved by having the design document there. And then when you've done the design document, you've basically already got a lot of the text for the marketing copy for the Steam page, and you just go in and zhuzh it up and make it a bit less technical document and a bit more marketing-y. This video, out of the ones we've watched so far, is the one that I think you should take the most notes from, because this guy really understands where he went wrong and delivers it in a way that is kind of genuinely insightful and entertaining.
Let's add elves, let's add loot, and street fights to the mix, because why not? I had just played Streets of Rage 4, and growing up I was a massive fan of the first 3 games. I turned my game into Lord of the Rings meets Diablo meets Streets of Rage.
That's just Golden Axe, surely.
And this did actually help me. I transformed my game again, but this time it was a lot more focused. The problem was, it now had impossible ambitions.
And one of the problems here with taking the assets from one idea and just putting them over to another is that this perspective that you need for a side-scrolling beat-em-up like Streets of Rage or Golden Axe now doesn't work as well with that tall, skinny pixel art. I think because the sprites can go behind and in front of each other, you now need other ways to kind of cast shadows and stuff to make the game more legible. There's a reason that those games have the art style that they do, I think.
But I was blinded by making a game that I had dreamed of playing.
Now, I would suggest one of the reasons why this type of content is so popular is that human beings are loss averse. Now, if you haven't heard of the term loss aversion before, it basically means that we try and avoid pain, we try and avoid losing things. Now, I'm not going to go into this in massive depth now, but loss aversion is a concept that game designers should be familiar with. And for a brilliant introduction to this topic, I would suggest you check out the GDC talk on loss aversion in board game design by Jeffrey Engelstein. Now, it is a talk about board games, but there are so many insights here into human psychology that you can use in your game dev, and so that you can understand why certain types of YouTube content are popular, because these types of videos that are basically like, watch this video to learn the super secret to not failing at stuff, are really popular. And I think some of these videos are more useful than others. I think as well as loss aversion and this desire to avoid pain, we're also very attracted to negativity in storytelling, which is how tabloid newspapers and kind of mainstream news have worked for over a century on us, is that they kind of give us fearful stories and we feel that we're going to be in danger if we don't pay attention to that content. When it comes to educational content about game design and what we can learn about game design, I would pay extra attention to this tendency the YouTube algorithm has to spit out all of this content about failure. Because I've noticed already, after running this channel for just 2 months, that if I create a YouTube video that has this kind of baity, fear-mongering title and thumbnail, it tends to do a lot better than if I just say, here's how to make a good game. And that doesn't sit well with me. I think there's something wrong with that. So if you want to get good at something, don't just focus on how have other people failed? You need to also look at the successes and spend time studying things like GDC talks where successful people talk about how they made a successful game. Because I think this culture that game dev YouTube currently has of just constantly churning out this is why my game failed type stuff, it's only useful to a certain extent. You have to look beyond that at some point.